Welcome. If you've got questions about shadow work, energy work, and witchcraft, then I have answers for you. For the last year and a half, I've been going live every Wednesday answering people's questions about topics related to shadow work, energy work, and witchcraft. And I've put together 13 of my favorite questions from the past year in this current special year-end episode. So merry meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. And I am here bringing you some of my favorite questions, but also answering other questions that people leave for me in the chat during this live, and some that people have sent to me this week as well. So I'm just going to dive right in. There are a lot of questions tonight. So let's dive right in here and start with a question from Patrick. And just saying hi to Sabrina. I see her in the chat. Let me know if the sound sounds better this time. I hope it does. But I don't have a way to test that once I'm live. So let's hope it sounds great. Perfect. Okay, so we are going to start with Patrick's question, and then we'll go on. Okay. And anybody who's here live, you can leave questions as well, and I'll answer those too. Okay, so Patrick asked a question about spirit guides, and so before I dive into this question, when it came to choosing the questions that I would feature in tonight's episode, I mostly look for questions that I get asked a lot, that more than one person has asked me in the past, and so I know this is a question that multiple people are wondering about. And then there were also just some questions that I thought were particularly good, and I wanted to share those as well. So Patrick asked about spirit guides, and he said, how do you communicate with them? He said he's spoken to some spirits before, but he can't really quite connect to his own spirit guides. And so I want to start by answering this question by saying that when it comes to contacting our spirit guides, it's really dependent on the person. We all will experience this differently. And so one of the very best things that we can do is just let go of our expectations about how it should be. So we might hear stories from people that we know who say, when I have a spirit guide, right, that has this name, and we have these conversations with each other. And when we hear stories like that, we start to think that that's the way it's supposed to be for us as well. And then when it doesn't happen, we start to panic. There's something wrong with us, or we're not getting the right information. So I just want to normalize all of this by saying that there's no right way to connect to your spirit guides. Okay, everybody needs to find out how that conversation works for them. Now, the second thing that I would probably suggest people do who are asking a question like this, or who are wondering about getting greater communication with their guides. So perhaps a person's asking this question because they're not really, don't feel like they're getting anything, or maybe they feel like they're getting a little bit, but it's not, it's not up to what they'd like. Is to really think about where you are physically and energetically. So really making sure that you're sleeping enough, that you're eating enough nourishing food, that you're doing grounding. So these things may seem strange as an answer to communicating with spirit guides, but the reality is that when our physical body is not up to par, it's going to be harder for us to connect through the etheric body, through those more subtle bodies, which is where the connection to our guides takes place. So I know in my own practice, when I am not sleeping right, and when I am not doing enough grounding work, or I'm not doing enough self-care, my ability to communicate with my guides is going to be very subpar. Okay, so that's the first thing I would think about, anybody who's asking this type of question. Now, the next thing I would also recommend is if you're somebody who's having trouble connecting to your guides, or you're trying to take it, kind of amplify it, think about 5 to 10 things that you would like to get information or insight on from your guides. Because sometimes we just have this generalized idea, like I just want to communicate with my guides. And when that question is so general, we might be getting information coming through, but we're not recognizing it because we're not really sure of what question we're asking. So if we ask those very specific questions, then when the answers start coming through, it's more apparent that they're for us, I guess is what I should say. Okay, so thinking about 5 to 10 questions, you can write them down. You can write them on a piece of paper and put them under your pillow. Just having them written down is enough to tell the universe, I intend to get these answers, and I intend to do so through communication with my guides. Okay, so once that's done, then you really want to be open to how the insights come through. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the question, it's not for everybody. It's not like someone speaking to you and telling you the answers. Sometimes it comes through subtle synchronicities and signs of the universe. It can come through a song. in a car that's passing by you on the road. It can come through people that you're talking to. So even going to a show like this and listening to someone speak about things, answering questions that you didn't even ask, you might find that your guides kind of slip the insight through that person to you. Those people can act like a channel for you, for your guides. And so just being as open and receptive as you possibly can to the information that's coming through you'll be sure that you're not going to miss things as much, And then, like I mentioned, making sure that you're really releasing the expectations about how this should be and just surrender to the universe. Now, one other final thing I'll mention is that trust can be very important when it comes to communicating with your guides. If you have a lot of self-doubt and you don't think this is possible for you, it's probably not possible for you right now. See, our belief is about 90% of all of this work that we do is how much we believe in ourselves. And it's not easy to just like turn on that light and just say, now I believe in myself. That when we have years of self-doubt or we have people around us who are making us feel doubt in ourselves and our abilities, it can take a long time to kind of pull this all apart. But if you feel that you are someone who has self-doubt, consider working with your solar plexus chakra. And that is a place that you can transform your self-doubt into self-belief. And people will find through working with that long term that a lot of this self-doubt will start to go away. And then the intuition and this ability to connect to the guide starts to amplify. All right. So I hope that helps with that question. Now, the second, I kind of put these in order so they're sort of related. This next question that I have is from Kylie, and she's asking about connecting to the ancestors. So this is a very good question as well. This was asked like right around Samhain when everyone's wondering about connecting to the ancestors. So I'm going to give a little bit of information on, a little bit insight on how I would connect to the ancestors, and you can see if any of this works for you. So Kylie said, I've been really trying to learn how to better connect with my ancestors. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways that we can connect. So the first thing I would ask anybody who wants to connect to an ancestor is to see if they can ask their ancestors how they want to connect. So some want to connect in specific ways, right? And if we're not listening to them, if we have our own, again, preconceived notions about how the dialogue works, we might miss what's going on. So if you start by listening and trusting any messages that come through, like literally closing your eyes, getting into a light meditative state, and asking the ancestors, how would you like to be connected to? And then listen to that subtle voice that you hear in the back of your mind and trust that that's the answer. Sometimes what happens is that voice pops into our head and we very quickly negate it. And we say, well, that's not real. I just made that up. And look, we just lost information by doing that, right? So if we are engaging in this practice, if we want to connect to guides, we want to connect to our ancestors, we want to foster more self-belief in our magical abilities, we got to make this deal with ourselves that we're going to listen to what's coming through and not simply negate it outright in the beginning. So just listen to that voice that comes through. How do they want to be connected? And they may tell you some unusual things, and so this isn't related directly to the ancestors, but I've told this story a couple of times before that we have fairy activity in our yard just based on the way that the yard is built. It amplifies around Beltane, but it's there at all times of the year. And at one point I asked them, what do you want for an offering? What would you like for an offering? And I just got in a light meditative state, closed my eyes, and they wanted sand from the beach. And that's the first thing that popped into my head. Now, I could easily negate that, totally, right? I could say I just made all that up. But it's kind of an unusual thing to make up, right? So I trusted that that was what they wanted, and I didn't question it. And we live about 25 miles from the beach, but we go there every full moon for our ritual. And so I go there and I bring sand back to the fairies, and they seem to be very happy with that. So the point of the story is, when you are working in this way, when you're trying to connect through the veils, through the etheric plane to other beings, trust the answers that are coming through. It sometimes is that very subtle voice in your head. Now, another thing that a person who specifically wants to work with ancestors can do is to set up an ancestor altar. Now, typically we do this at Samhain, but this could be done any time of the year. The ancestor altar can have mementos and photos of the person that you're remembering. It can have anything that connects you to that person. So if that's if the ancestor you're trying to connect to is someone who you knew through life, right? A grandparent or great grandparent or great aunt or someone who's crossed over, you likely have pictures of that person and some jewelry or things that belong to them, and that can go on the altar. You likely know foods that they used to like to eat when they were living, and those can be left on the altar as offerings. But if you are leaving offerings for an ancestor that's perhaps hundreds of years old that you don't know, maybe it's somebody you read about in your genealogy, that you can ask the ancestors again. You can ask that same question: what would you like for an offering? How would you like to be connected to, and listen to that subtle message coming through? But there are also just general offerings that a person could leave for an ancestor, lighting candles, like especially if it's an ancestor we don't know a lot about in the beginning. Just lighting some candles, leaving some flowers, leaving some water or some wine or something on the altar that's kind of just a typical offering. Honey, that's one that a lot of people offer. Rice, things that are stones that you like, just things that you picked up that you thought that your ancestor would like, and leave those on the altar. And then what you also want to do is then look for signs from your ancestors, because just like the guides, they can also communicate through the universe, through those subtle synchronicities and signs, through songs on the radio, through being channeled through somebody else, right? All of a sudden it seems as though the world has sort of stopped or slowed down, and that message that's coming through, even though it's being spoken to a lot of people, it's coming through specifically for you. And then another thing to try is automatic writing. Some people have good luck with it, others not so much. It can take a lot of patience and a lot of practice and a lot of nights of nothing coming through but gibberish and scratches. But eventually that can be a way that people learn how to connect to their ancestors. Okay. For those who are here live, again, if you guys have questions as well, you can leave them in the chat. I'm just going through some of my favorite ones from 2023. And anybody who's watching this too, if you could leave a thumbs up or a heart somewhere in the video, it helps us get this out to more people. Just saying hi to those. Sabrina, I see Sabrina's here, and Kurt and Melinda. Hi, everybody. Okay, next question I am going to answer is from Tara. And I try to theme these kind of in similar genres. So this question is about working with gods and goddesses. So she said specifically she was talking about goddesses, but this could extend to any deities. She said, how can I start working with goddesses, and which one should I start with? So this is a question I get asked a lot. I've done a full-length Ask Aislin just on deities. I plan to do more in the future. It's a very popular topic in our group. So how do we connect? How do we start? How do we even know what goddess to work with, or god? Well, for everybody, again, this answer is going to be a bit different. So some people find that starting with their ancestry can be good. If you know that you are, Irish, beginning to work with some of the Celtic deities, or at least starting to look at some of their myths, that can be a pathway to take. If you know that you have an Italian ancestry, looking at deities from Italy and Rome, that can make more sense, right? Ancestry can be a big one, but I fully believe that when we reincarnate over and over and over in this plane, we don't incarnate in the same exact culture every single time. So your ancestry in this lifetime alone may not lead you to all the deities that you are open are open to working with you. So another thing that I would look for is favorite stories and myths that you come along as you're doing some research, as you're starting to study gods and goddesses. If you find a particular myth that you're very attracted to, if you find a particular goddess or god, or even a particular culture that you're attracted to, it will often lead you to a culture that you likely had an incarnation in at some point. So that is why simply looking at your ancestry in just this life alone may not lead you to all of the possible deities you could work with. And so another thing you can think about, so let's say that you kind of did a cursory look at deities through your own ancestry, and then perhaps through like stories and myths and cultures that you're attracted to as well, and maybe nothing really resonates. The other thing to think about would be intentions. Do you have some intentions right now? My deities that I've worked with throughout the years have often been very connected to the intentions and the stage of life that I am in at that time. So there was a point of time when I was much younger. Well, I worked with a lot of deities of love. I worked with Aphrodite and Venus in both forms. I've worked with Epona, the deity of the Celtic deity of horses and fertility, and she's like a Mother Earth deity. I've worked with her a lot, but it had a very different intention at that time than I had when I was working with Aphrodite and Venus. Now I work with Lakshmi and Ganesha. And so each stage of my life, there's different energies, different intentions that I have. So if there's something you need, if you need healing, looking at healing deities could be very helpful. If you need, justice, right? So maybe there's a court case coming up, or some area of your life that you feel you need justice, looking up deities of justice and trying to pick one or more of those can lead you down a path towards finding a patron. The other thing you can do is let a deity choose you. So some people will find that the deity just out of nowhere will just appear in their lives over and over and over again. That's a good indication that they're kind of tapping you on the shoulder and they're telling you that they would like to work with you. So being very cognizant of that. One deity, in fact, Epona, when she came to me in a light meditation. Her name was just whispered kind of in my ear. I had no idea who she was. I'd never heard of this goddess before, but I looked her up, and it very much resonated. All of that I read about her resonated with where I was at in my life, and she became a patron of mine for years and still continues to be. So, just being open to kind of that idea as well, like seeing certain animals too. If you see an animal out in the wild a lot, or out when you're out on a hike a lot, and sometimes those animals can be connected to deities, and they could be messengers that are coming through and telling you that, hey, this is a deity you should try to connect to. So if you see a lot of animals, Google that and see, does that animal connect to a certain deity? And that could also be a pathway to find a patron. But for everybody, that will be different. And when someone has really no idea, I generally would tell them, just start with myths and stories, or start with the intention that you have and just follow that path to finding a deity. Okay, another question here. I have a few more people joining. Hi, Patty. I see you here now, too, in the chat. Hi, everybody. So I'm just going through, I'm answering some questions these are some of my favorite questions I've received from 2023, but if you guys have some other ones, put them in the chat. I'll be answering everyone's questions tonight. Jenny, this was a great question because I can't even tell you how many times I get asked this question. So she said that she hears, she works with, she's a coven out east, and she works with a lot of new witches, and she said one of the things that she hears a lot from new witches is, what's the difference between the dark moon and the new moon? She said, are they the same phase but just using different names? So very good question. I get asked it at least once a month probably. So you will come across people who will tell you that the two moons, dark moon and new moon, are the same thing. And energetically, I will tell you that they are absolutely not the same thing. So does that mean that it's wrong to do new moon stuff on dark moon? No. But I think it's also important for you to understand the two energies, because they can be used in tandem with one another. In fact, they kind of piggyback off of one another. So the dark moon begins on the night before the full moon. So basically the night before the new moon. So 24 hours before the new moon, we're in the phase that's called dark. Now, prior to that, we're in a phase that's called balsamic. That is 72 hours prior to the new moon. It is the time when we are most receptive for releasing, letting go, getting rid of stuff that doesn't serve us. And then that energy of letting go peaks on the night of the dark moon, that 24 hours before the new moon occurs. This is a really good time for people to let go of stuff that's not serving them, to do releasing rituals. I like to write down all the things that are in my way, or fears that I have, and then I write as many of them down as I can and burn them. And then what happens is that opens up space for new energy to come in. We can fill that with the intentions of the new moon. So here's how you can see how these two phases of the moon work so well together. We let go at the dark moon, and then we open up space for the new intention that we'll set at the new moon. So that's how I like to work with them. I will also mention that this energy also is sort of intertwined, which means it's sometimes hard to tell, where does dark moon energy end and new moon energy begin. So what I recommend people do is somewhere in that space of a couple days before or after the dark moon or the new moon, and dark moon. You have this space to kind of do any of this work. But what I recommend people do is let go and then set the new intention. Don't set the new intention and then let go. You want to let go and then set the new intention, and therefore you have that space to bring something in. So that is the difference between the dark moon and the new moon. And you will see people who will tell you that they are the same thing. Energetically, they're not. And I always use this analogy. It doesn't matter what gender you are. You can still understand the analogy. It's like the analogy of a period. When a person who has an active cycle has a period, it's basically letting go of energy. That's what the dark moon is. It's you letting go of energy that isn't serving you. Same thing with what a period is. Letting go of energy that is no longer needed in the body. And then what that does is it opens up the body for the next cycle, when now a new life could come in if the person were to right, get pregnant. But from the perspective of the dark moon and the new moon, that's the new moon. That's the part where now you've got the space to set that new intention. All right, so let's see here. Next question. This one is from Jen, and she said, can you briefly explain the 3 aspects of the triple goddess and how it relates to witches? Okay, so this is a good question, especially because we just had a question about deities. So the triple goddess comes in multiple forms. So I'm going to kind of talk about the different forms of the triple goddess. And then when we're talking about the triple goddess related to witches, we're usually talking about the idea of mother, maiden, and crone. But there are many, many forms of triplicity that we see throughout different cultures and throughout different religions historically. So, for example, if we look at like the Tridevi of Hinduism, we see the deities Sarasvati, Lakshmi, and Kali. And these are 3 deities who are essentially, they're essentially manifestations of Shakti, which is divine feminine energy, but they manifest in different ways. Like Sarasvati is a deity who's very much connected to like our throat chakra, manifestation, creativity, kind of getting the voice out. Lakshmi is very much connected to fertility and abundance. And Kali is the destroyer of the ego. So some people are terrified of her because she's a deity. They'll say she's a deity of the underworld or of death, but really the death that she represents is the death of the ego. So you can see these 3 deities, even though they represent kind of 3 aspects of that Shakti energy, that divine feminine energy, they're very different in themselves. You know, throughout history, we see various forms like this. We see the Graces and the Fates of Greece. We see the Christian Trinity itself, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And then there's also the mother, father, and child kind of, we have God and we have Mary and we have Jesus, which is very similar to that kind of Osiris, Isis, and Horus trinity that we see in the Egyptian pantheon. Now, Robert Graves, who was writing in, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s, but I don't have the date, I may not have the date correct, he very, very deeply studied the ancient Greek texts, and he saw that there was this connection between the goddesses Hecate, Diana, sometimes called in her form called Selene, or Persephone, and these deities, he saw this over and over as he was studying these myths and of these cultures. These deities represented 3 aspects that could be connected to life cycles, right? But also to the cycles of the moon. So here we have in the maiden form, we have the waning or the waxing moon, right? The waxing crescent that builds up to full, and then at full we have kind of the mother energy of the goddess. And then when we're waning, we have that crone energy of the goddess. And so that's really where, when we're talking about the triple goddess in neo-paganism, witchcraft, Wicca, this is usually what we're talking about, kind of that maiden, mother, and crone idea. But just know that there are other types of trinity or triplicity, or sometimes it's called triumvirate, right? There's different forms of that. That's not always that mother, maiden, and crone. And then I also mentioned a word about the Morrigan. So sometimes people will connect her to the triple goddess, and she is a triple goddess, maybe not the same type that we see in kind of neo-paganism, because she isn't really, if you look at her 3 forms, she's not really divided into maiden, mother, and crone. It's more the sisters that are just divisions of that goddess that have different ways that they manifest. But that's really when someone's talking about what is the triple goddess, that usually they're talking about that mother, maiden, crone, those aspects of the goddess that we see in neo-paganism. Okay, so hopefully that answered that question. All right, next up, and anybody who's here live, you can put questions in the chat as well. So this question, we're kind of shifting into some energy work now. So Tara asked about chakras, and she said she wanted to know more about the chakras. So I just want to give a brief overview, and then there were some questions that were sent to me earlier this week. Eileen asked a question that is related to the chakras and how to use energy to kind of heal yourself physically through energetic healing. So we're going to answer Eileen's question right after this one as well. Okay, so a brief overview of the chakras. The chakras are energy centers of the body. They are found not in the physical body. They're found in what's called the etheric body. We might call it the pranic body. And they have connections to the physical body through the plexuses, which are nerve bundles of fibers in the body. So for example, the easiest one to think about is the solar plexus, because the chakra in the physical manifestation of it are actually the same. They have the same name. So you have something in your midsection called the solar plexus. It is a physical set of nerve fibers that come together into this area. People will don't talk about it as much from the physical perspective. You'll hear more about it with the energetic perspective, from the energetic perspective. But the solar plexus, when we're talking about it energetically, is this kind of center of your body. Many people will actually, if you press into your abdomen here and go right underneath your ribs where they come together here at the base of the sternum, and you walk down maybe a couple of finger widths like that, you will eventually come to a spot that's a bit tender. So here it is on my body. This is usually the solar plexus right here. If you notice, it's actually about 2 or 3 finger widths above the navel. It's not actually usually at a person's physical navel. It's right about here. So this is how these energetic centers connect to the physical. Now, what happens is that because the physical body and the energetic body are so intertwined, you can't really separate one from the other. And so these energetic centers are constantly communicating with the physical body and vice versa, and they're telling each other what's going on with the health of the body, right? So what will happen is that we will have, this is going to lead into Eileen's question in a moment, but we have pain in a certain aspect of the body. So let's say I've been dealing with a lot of neck pain lately. So this is very much connected to the throat chakra, and this pain in the body or tension in the body or some kind of a physical manifestation will tell you that something's a little bit out when it comes to your physical energy. So before I go into Elaine's question, just because I'm supposed to be doing a brief overview of the chakra system, I'm going to start at the very base. So your very base bottom chakra is called the root chakra. It's found right around where your tailbone is physically. That is usually visualized to be a reddish color, and it connects to our security, our stability, and our feelings of being safe in this world. Our finances are there, so our home, so anything that's kind of like makes you not feel secure, that's going to impact your root chakra. Above that, slightly above kind of the pelvic area, and probably about 2 or 3 inches below the navel is your sacral chakra, usually visualized as orange. It connects you to the element of water, and it is also about our emotions. So if we're feeling that we're kind of like our emotions are fluctuating, or we're feeling very emotional, that usually means that the sacral chakra is kind of opened up and activating. Other things with the sacral chakra, this is where a part of our creativity is as well, and our ability to go with the flow because of that connection to the water element. Now above that is the solar plexus, like I just mentioned, found a few inches above the actual navel of the body. This is where your self-belief, your self-confidence, your willpower, all of that is there. Your heart chakra is the bridge between the lower 3 chakras and the upper 3. So some will say it's the connection that connects the physical to the spiritual. The heart chakra is about our relationships, our ability to connect with other people, our ability to love others, including ourselves, always starts with us first and foremost. The throat chakra is in the neck. It is usually visualized, I should go back up, the heart is usually green, and the solar plexus is yellow. The throat is usually like a deep blue color. This is where we communicate, right? It's also a creative center of the body as well. So this is where we can manifest things through our voice, right? The things that we get out into the world. But this is also how we speak our truth. So if we're finding that there's something that we're hiding from people, that's going to impact our throat chakra here. If there's a lot of lies that we have to tell or we're around a lot, that's going to impact it. And then, of course, we have the third eye located in the forehead, usually visualized like an indigo color. Sometimes people will say purple. This is where our intuition is. And then finally, the crown at the top of the head. Some say a few inches above actually above the physical body. The crown is our connection to the universe. So these chakras, this kind of leads into Eileen's question that she left for me this week. And she said, I want to dive into the energetic origins of illness, physical illness. She said, I want to get to the root causes, which I feel are energetic or karmic in nature. So what I very much agree with what she's talking about. So when we have physical illness, it's not just physical. So I would never tell a person not to go to a physical doctor. I think that you should always be at physical doctors to make sure that you're aware of exactly what's going on physically. But let's go back to my neck. So there's been a lot of pain in the neck, a lot of tightness, a lot going up here. It's led into some headaches as well, some stuff going on in my jaw. All this is pointing to an issue of my throat chakra. So what I would want to do is, if this was new, if all this had started up and was new, I would want to go in and I'd want someone to look at my neck, maybe a chiropractor, maybe a medical doctor, maybe I'd be at the dentist looking for at the TMJ or something like that. But then on top of that, I would also be working energetically with my throat chakra. Now, one of the very best ways to work energetically with the chakras is through yoga, but it doesn't have to be the yoga that you think of traditionally in the West. It doesn't have to be flowing, moving stuff. It's just, when we say that, we're talking about poses, things that will actually stretch the area. So really just with my neck, it might be just neck stretches like this, or standing and bending over and then just lightly kind of pulling on my neck to lengthen it a bit. But I also might be working with singing or chanting, things that are gonna get my voice activated, since it's my throat chakra I'm worried about. Or I could be working with the color of blue because that's connected to it. So each of the chakras, depending on where your pain is in your body, if it's your hips, that's going to be your sacral chakra. If it's in your low back, that's going to be your root and probably your sacral chakra. If it's up in your shoulders, that's going to be your heart chakra. If it's down in the arms, that's also going to be your heart chakra. If you're having headaches, that's probably your third eye and your neck and your throat chakra. So if you can pinpoint where that pain is, that physical illness or whatever it is, Google what chakra is connected to blank, and you'll find the chakra, and then begin working with that. And then that's something you can do additionally to your physical healing. So without knowing much more about the specific physical illness, I can't really answer any more of that question, but that would be my best advice to you. And I absolutely believe that sometimes some of this can be taken care of just through energetic work, but always pair it with that physical, just to make sure there's nothing physically wrong before you continue. Rebecca's here, and she said, what about the knees or the feet? Okay, so knees and feet are always connected to the root chakra, always to the root chakra. I will say, though, from a physical perspective, anybody who came, like I also teach yoga, people probably know, and anybody who came to me with a knee issue is often a hamstring issue, a tight hamstring issue, which will be connected to the root, but it can also be a tight hip issue, which would be the sacral chakra. So somebody with knees and feet problems, I would be working with the root chakra and the sacral chakra, especially if I felt there was a connection up into my hips. Okay, very good question. All right, so we're going to segue now into a bit about shadow work, some shadow work questions. So this question is just a general, I'm starting out with someone says, what is shadow work? So shadow work is basically a way that we access the hidden parts of ourselves so that we can take back control. So essentially what happens is your shadow is all the parts of you that have been rejected, and they can be rejected for a variety of reasons. They oftentimes are rejected when we're very young, and we learn that there are parts of us that aren't accepted by our families, or aren't accepted by the church we grew up in, or the school system we're at, or our friends around us. And so we we basically break those pieces of us off. We push them into the shadows. This is all done unconsciously. And then, fast forward 20, 30, 40 years, and now we're reacting to all these things in our lives and we have no idea why. And what our shadow work does is it shines a light on all of these shadow aspects all around us that we can't see. And once we shine that light on them, we realize that they're actually just parts of us. And so we understand that when we are having these reactions that we thought we didn't know why we were having them, well, we know why. It's because of that shadow aspect. But now we brought it into the light. And so we get to choose whether or not we will allow it to affect us. Now, there's also a very creative aspect of the shadow, which is also composed of like all the things we tried on when we were little that we didn't end up doing. So, but any of these things can cause us problems. The issue isn't really the shadow itself. It's the fact that we're out of control. We don't have any control over it because we don't know what it's doing there in the shadows. So that's essentially what shadow work in the shadow is. Carl Jung, who's called the godfather of shadow work, he said that unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate. So you'll feel like things are being done to you. But he also said, though, that shadow work isn't just about healing yourself emotionally. Someone had mentioned, shadow work just about crying and processing my feelings. If so, I can do that anywhere. Well, it's not just about that. That is a byproduct of shadow work. But shadow work itself is you getting in and figuring out all of the whys. Why is this all happening? And taking back that control. And so Jung said that shadow work is the most authentic path to enlightenment. So he felt when a person went through this type of work, this was the pathway to get to the other side, which is where you would become a more enlightened being. Now, the ultimate goal for us is to, integrate all parts of the shadow and connect to the higher self eventually. But that is essentially what shadow work is in a nutshell. So adding on to that, what could a person do if they wanted to do shadow work? Well, what I would do is, the first step is just to decide you want to begin the process and then let go of any fears or preconceived notions that you have about it, what it's supposed to be. Sometimes people will say, I'm so afraid of shadow work. Well, there's nothing really to be afraid of unless you're afraid of yourself, which there's a reality to that. We might be very afraid of what's gonna be there. But I will tell you right now, is this kind of work, it has to be done somewhere in your evolutions. You can do it right now in this incarnation, or you can do it after you cross over and you go and you're in that in-between space before you incarnate again. But I believe that doing the work now, not only is it going to make your life better here, it's going to make that transition through to the other side and then into your next incarnation much easier as well. So I wouldn't put this off. I would do this. So what do you do? Once you get over the fears and the preconceived notions, the best thing you can do is just look for your triggers. The things that are bothering you, that irk you, that annoy you, those are showing you things that you're ready to work on. And the very best thing you can do, and this is hard, but once you identify a trigger or something that's upsetting to you, try to remove the other person or remove the external thing that's causing it. And just really ask yourself, what is it drawing out of me? Is it connecting back to something in my childhood? Is it, what is it? Am I afraid that I'm like that other person? Why would it be so bad to be like that other person? There's a whole plethora of questions you could start to ask yourself. And it's very internal, kind of contemplative work. Once you identify the trigger, also know that it doesn't all have to happen really fast. Like you won't, oh, there's my trigger. Oh, I just solved the problem. Shadow work's over. It's not really that way. Sometimes it's identifying the trigger, and it can take months of contemplating it to act, and all of a sudden one day there's kind of this aha moment and you have the answer. So just letting go of that, of the preconceived notions, kind of identifying your triggers, looking for some shadow work prompts online. They'll ask you all kinds of questions that you can use as kind of jumping off points to start the dialogue, right, with your shadow self. And also look for places in your life where you say, I don't know why I do that, but. I don't know why I say that, but. So whenever or I don't know why that always happens to me, but. So wherever you say that, those patterns, those are rarely external things happening. Those are usually internal things. And sometimes people will, they'll kind of start that dialogue and then they'll become convinced that someone's put a curse on them or some external thing that's doing it. And while it's true, there's people who that can happen too. The vast majority of people, that's not what's happening when was worried about freaking out while they're doing it. And then the next thing I would mention is pair it with energy work. Energy work is without doing energy work along with shadow work, it can feel like our shadow work is very ungrounded. So that would be some other advice. And then what I would recommend is finding support, especially if you think that a lot of things are going to be coming up. Find some support. So having a therapist on call, it doesn't matter. That therapist does not have to know what shadow work is. I have a therapist. She doesn't know the first thing about shadow work. But when the things come up for me, I can at least go and I can have her help me process them as well. It's nice to know that there's somebody else there working with you. But you can also have a support group that is doing this kind of work, or a friend who's doing the work with you. So this is the very reason that we started our shadow work, energy work membership, Shadow Seekers, was so people wouldn't do it alone. So they'd have a guide, me, to do it with, and they'd have friends in the group that they would do this kind of work with as well. So finding support can help, eliminate people from, or eliminate that kind of feeling of freaking out when you're doing it, because then you realize that you're not alone. And then the next thing I would also mention is know your limits. So if the work gets too intense, kind of be able to step away from that and do something else for a while. So even in our Shadow Seekers membership, we can't do that hardcore shadow work 24/7, 365 days a year. So we'll have other things we're doing. So we'll do some kind of intense work, and then maybe there's a month where we are looking at our astrology charts, like this is what we're doing in January. We're going to be looking at our astrology charts and looking at a piece of the astrology chart that shows our destiny. So this is kind of some lighter work that we can do in between the heavy, deeper stuff. We did a bunch of grief work recently. We can't be doing the hard stuff all the time. So we go in and out of it. And you can do that same thing in your own practice. Kind of know your limits. When it gets to be too much, back off. Do something lighter, work with a chakra or something like that, and then come back to the shadow work when you're ready. Okay, so that was a question for Brigitte. Okay, let's see here. What else do we have? This is a related question. This one was from Aaron. This one's also from this week. And he said, does it, and by it he meant shadow work, get a little easier? And then I actually asked him another question to kind of clarify. And then he said he refuses to practice any real witchcraft before he completes his shadow work. Okay, so great question. Does it get easier? So the short answer to this is yes, absolutely. It does absolutely get easier when you're on the path, when you're doing it. So what really ends up happening eventually is that shadow work gets ingrained into just your day-to-day life. So like the people in our Shadow Seekers membership who've been there a while, they will tell you it's just something that we're always doing. Does it mean that we're always in intense shadow work? No. See the last question. No, we're not always in the intensity of it. But it's always kind of in the periphery. When something happens, we might take note of it and be like, that's kind of an interesting thing to ponder in my shadow work, and maybe we file that away for the next time we're ready to do some deeper work. So when that kind of becomes ingrained in your daily routine, you're going to notice that becomes a lot easier. What will simply start happening is you look out in the world around you and you just start to notice areas that you're experiencing differently. You're experiencing that relationship with that person differently. You're experiencing the situation differently. This is the sign that the shadow work has kind of it's becoming ingrained in your everyday life. Now, as far as being completed, I did really want to highlight that part of the question because Aaron had mentioned wanting to complete his shadow work before moving on to witchcraft. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but probably all the way across the board, you're never going to find anybody who teaches shadow work who tells you that it's going to be over. Shadow work's not something that we complete. So it's kind of like witchcraft. Like, are we ever going to be on the path of witchcraft and then we'll be like, oh, I've done everything I can. It's over. I've done witchcraft. That's not ever really going to happen. And the same thing is true for shadow work, it's not really going to be complete. It's a lifelong process. Now, what I wanted to say is I think it is very noble for someone to say what he said. So when Aaron said, I want that to be completed before I do any real witchcraft, I think that that is so smart. I've been a high priestess for several decades. I've been doing this for a long time. And in our coven, we've seen people come through for various reasons. And sometimes people want to just come in and just want to learn as many spells as they can. And honestly, I don't think that's the best approach. I think that knowing thyself is one of the most important parts of a witch's path. It's in the 13 Goals of a Witch by Scott Cunningham. And shadow work is definitely the way to know thyself. But like I said, you're not going to probably complete the shadow work ever in this lifetime. You're always going to be working on it. So when will you know when it's enough? Like, when will it be enough to say, okay, now I feel like I'm comfortable enough doing the witchcraft? So, what I would recommend is kind of two different ways of looking at it. One is that you're doing it all together. So you're doing shadow work first and foremost, and you're also working on witchcraft. And maybe you're doing light witchcraft or anything you're kind of afraid of doing. Maybe you hold back until you feel more secure in your shadow work. So that's one way to approach it. Another way to approach it is to kind of give yourself a time frame. So say, I'm going to do some intense shadow work for the next 3 months, 6 months, next year and a day, right? If we want to borrow that from kind of like initiation. And I'm going to do that really intense shadow work for that amount of time. And I'm going to trust that during that time, I'm going to learn enough that I'll be prepared to then start, kind of start on my pathway to witchcraft. So it's up to you how you kind of frame that. But I would recommend at some point, you're going to get to the point where you'll probably feel comfortable enough that you'll be able to do both. Okay, and so I'm just looking at the chat here for a second, and before I pause, I got a couple more questions, but I always love looking at the chat here, so let me go see here. Kurt, going back to kind of the pain, Kurt said he gets the pain, a neck pain sometimes. He just close his eyes, sit back, and focus on white light for healing. Yeah, so that's very good too. Sometimes we can just bring in light, and that very much can kind of balance the chakras. Okay. Kurt said how to deal with depression in witchcraft when it's hard to focus past the depression. Yes. So that can be very hard. And the answer that I have for that isn't always a popular answer. But sometimes dealing with the depression needs to take place first. Depression is energetically, it's oftentimes a root chakra. It's an issue of the root chakra. And so if anybody's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's this pyramid that kind of has these needs that all people have. And at the very bottom of them are like the security needs. We need water and food and shelter, and we need stability, and we need money, and all these things are kind of at the base. And then eventually we need connections and people, and it's enlightenment and all of that, individualization, all of that, individuation, all that's all up at the top. So those issues, the spiritual issues, they're not as easy to access when we are feeling kind of like out of sorts. So I will say, though, is that it's not easy to deal with depression. I know from myself, I've suffered from depression over the years. I've suffered from anxiety. But what I would recommend for somebody who said, it's kind of getting hard to focus past the depression, I would work with the root chakra, and I would work with the sacral chakra. And I would do some energy work down there. Get that energy moving. I bet that there's some stuck and stagnant energy in those two energy centers. If you can get some of that moving, you may start to feel some of the depression lift. And it may not even be something about learning how to focus past the depression. It's just getting some of that to lift, and that clears the way, and then all of a sudden it's non-issue anymore. But that would be my best. When people say I have a lot of depression, I usually generally say, work with those two lower chakras for a while and see if that starts to ease some of that. I see Pamela's here. Hi, Pamela. Sabrina said, do you think as you elevate your spirituality, it helps remove things or people that you do not need 100%? And sometimes it removes people and things that you think you still need, but you don't. So just be aware of that. But yes, people will kind of, as you evolve, people will sort of drop off, or your relationship with them will not be the same anymore. And it just naturally happens. And the things that you don't really need will be removed as well. To took me a really long time to quit smoking cigarettes. And it was something I knew was not like something I did not need that spiritually, because here's why. Number one is that when I was smoking, obviously it's compromising your lungs. And I believe that one of the best ways for us to move energy through the body is through breath. So immediately it's like almost like kind of shooting myself in the foot. I want to evolve spiritually, but I'm doing this thing that's not good for me physically, right? And therefore it's not good for me energetically. But as I began to kind of work more and more and more on myself spiritually, honestly, it became pretty easy to quit the smoking, which is strange because it took me a long time to get to that place. I didn't think I was going to be able to, but eventually it just kind of lifted off, and that was something that I was able to let go of rather relatively easily. So I do think, yeah, those things kind of just drop off as we evolve as well. And then Sabrina also mentioned that always pondering questions, and it is so easy. And she's in our Shadow Seekers membership, so she's been doing this with us for several months. And so, yeah, she knows that the pondering of the questions, it's just this thing you're always doing. You're always kind of in the shadow work peripherally, and then eventually sometimes we dive into the kind of deeper work, but we're always kind of thinking about it. Okay, what else do I have here? Okay, I have two more questions that I wanted to answer, and then I believe that I have one that was sent to me left. I hope I can find it. And then anybody else who's got questions here. Now, there were people who left questions for me in the group earlier this week. Some of them I went through and I already answered them just by writing, and then a few of them I'm featuring them tonight. This is an old question. I really like this question. A lot of people ask this of me. So Kristen said, are there protections that are specific to when we have to be around a group of people? And she said, can I use some sort of protection to stop being so affected by people's energy? And it's a great question. I get asked it all the time, mostly because we have a lot of empaths here and a lot of people sensitive to energy. Okay. So the first thing that I would recommend is cleansing the aura. And this is a technique that you're going to use mostly when you're leaving the group of people. So let's say you have to be with a bunch of people and you pick up other people's energy. You feel like you're picking up other people's energy. You're going to come home, and just like you would go take a shower and just kind of wash off the physical dirt, you're going to kind of take like kind of an energetic shower and wash off kind of the energetic residue that's kind of attached to you. And so you close your eyes, you get into kind of a light meditative state. And then see if you can visualize your aura. And not everybody can. So if you can't, that's okay. Not everybody can, but you'll visualize your aura for a bit. And even if you can't, you're just going to imagine that you were like brushing it. So like you had a brush and you were just brushing like dust away or dirt away from the aura, and just kind of go through that area. Even if you can't visualize it, just kind of imagine yourself doing this in your mind's eye, brushing it through. Now, some people, as they start doing this, they may notice that there are little tears in their aura, or they may notice there are little dark spots in the aura or in the chakras. And those, you can also kind of brush those dark spots away. Or you can imagine like when you inhale, and then as you exhale, just imagine that breath just going to that place in the energetic body, and just like you were blowing smoke away, just blowing it away from the aura. So it seems very simple, but it actually can be very effective. And that's something I recommend that an empath or somebody who's really sensitive to energy, I recommend they do that every day when they come home if they've been around a lot of people. Now, another thing that you can do is while you're with the people, so let's say you're in the situation and you're with these people and you got to be with them for a while and you're picking up stuff and it's getting too much. What I recommend doing is imagining pushing your aura out. So sometimes what will happen is we try to make ourselves really small, right? And we bring the aura in really, really tight against us, and that's okay. But it can compromise us a little bit. Like I sometimes think it can compromise your solar plexus because you're making yourself small. You don't need to do that. What you really need to do is push your aura out. Make your aura a little bit bigger. So you have almost like you have a force field around you, right? So again, you could do this like just standing there. You can just kind of imagine just pushing energetically, push that aura out around you, or go into the bathroom, close your eyes if you want to get into kind of a light meditative state. And again, just imagine that aura being kind of right here, and then just push it out a foot. Okay, and then make an intention, set an intention that the only things that are going to come into your aura are the things that you allow in, that you invite in, and everything else that's not serving you, all the energy that you don't want to pick up, all that's going to stay on the outside. So that's another thing that you can do as well. But something else that I really like is, let me see if I had anything else I was going to say to her, is that you could make a sachet, like a protective sachet that you could carry with you. You could get some herbs of protection, put those in there. Any stones that you really like, put those in a little piece of cloth and then tie it up with a ribbon. You can carry that with you as your protective kind of amulet. You can charge a piece of jewelry, any piece of jewelry, you could charge it in a circle during spell work and charge it with the intention of protection and wear that. And again, the idea here is it's really your intention. We don't want to be affected by that person's energy or those people's energy around us. And we're setting that intention, and that is going to do most of the work. But a final thing you can do is make a sigil. So since this is the year-end episode, we'll show how to make a sigil again. So what you will do is you start with kind of an I am statement, and I'm making a sigil for protection here since that's the question. And so I just wrote on a piece of paper, I am protected. There's that even. Yeah, there we go. I am protected. But you're just going to say anything here. Try to put it in present tense. Usually I am statements are the ones that work the best. Now, after you do that, you're just going to go ahead and take the same thing, and you're going to cross out all the vowels, and you're going to cross out any letters that are doubled. So you can see here, I've crossed those all out. And once those have been crossed out, you'll rewrite the letters that remain. So once we crossed out like the I and the A, and we had a double T, this is all we have left. We have M, P, R, C, D. And then from there, you can use your creativity to create some kind of a symbol or a drawing with those letters or pieces of those letters. And the idea here is that no one would look at this and know that this said, I am protected. So if you're interested in learning more about this, I do have a whole episode on kind of protection spells and practices that you can use. I'll drop the link below this too for those who want to dive into this a little more deeply. But this is enough, and you could draw this on something to carry with you. You could, people will put it in wax. They'll draw it in wax and then burn it, or they put it on a piece of paper and burn it. But it absolutely could be carried with you as well, sewn into clothing, things like that. But that is how you would make a protective amulet. And while a lot of times we think of these, or I should say, a protective sigil, and while we sometimes think of sigils as being like only about physical protection, you absolutely could use them for energetic protection as well. Okay, and then I really wanted to end with this question. I feel like I've lost a question here, though, that someone asked me. Yes, I know it was Pamela. I do have a question from Pamela that I've got at the end here. But so one more. This is our final one from 2023. I pulled out this question because I get asked this a lot, and I think that there's many people who will benefit from hearing this. So Miss D said she would like to learn different ways to be able to actually visualize and stay focused on an object during meditation. And she said it's hard with her ADD. And there are a lot of people who kind of come through my Shadow Seekers group and our bigger Body Mind Witchcraft group over the past year and a half who have a similar, whether it's ADD, ADHD, or something that's causing trouble focusing. It's hard to focus sometimes, okay? It's hard to meditate sometimes. It can be hard to sit still. So here are some ideas that I have to kind of help with that. Okay, so the first thing is ADHD can make meditation complicated. So the best advice I can give is to find your own comfort zone. You don't have to meditate sitting or lying down. You never have to do that. So sometimes people say, I can't sit, therefore I can't meditate. Then get up and walk. There are so many different ways that you can meditate, so we need to change our idea of what meditation is. Meditation is simply, it's the process of getting into a receptive state. That's really all it is. So if you can change your idea about what meditation is, it's not just this for 25 minutes. It can be a lot of different things. So you feel free to stand or move during meditation. You can rock back and forth if this helps to stay focused by moving. If you can pace back and forth, and you can listen to a guided meditation as you're pacing back and forth. Your eyes do not need to be closed for meditation. So there's a lot of things that we can do here. You can rub something between your fingers, like a stone or like a fidget stick or something like that. Um, Perhaps mala beads can help. So mala beads look like can kind of look like a rosary. It's 108 beads that are on a strand, and sometimes rubbing those and counting those can help people stay in focus. But ask yourself, anybody who's having a problem with meditation, having a problem with sitting still, with focusing, with visualizing, ask yourself, what helps you do some of these things in your non-meditative life, right? And how could you incorporate more of that into your meditative practice or into your magical life? And like I said, consider a walking meditation. Considering using sensory cues too that can also help you. So always wear the same clothing, always burn the same incense, always play the same music. What that does is that actually is training your subconscious mind to expect an outcome when those things happen. So for example, I have this rose incense that I started burning literally 20 some years ago. I will only recently found it again. And I'm telling you, it's like you burn it and it's like I'm back in the circle like 20 years ago. I'm back in a witch's circle the moment I smell that. So, so what it does is training your subconscious mind to expect a certain thing. So if you start out trying to meditate and it's not going well, just keep burning that same incense. And eventually your subconscious mind may kind of latch onto that and be like, okay, I get it. I understand what's expected of me when I smell that smell. But the same thing goes for the same clothes, the same music that you're playing, the same place that you sit or you lie or you walk. Just trying to make that as consistent as possible can help people who are having trouble with this. Um, what else did I say here? Also, remember that you don't always have to visualize in order to have a successful meditation. Meditation can just simply be listening to the person's voice in a guided meditation and just letting their voice like lead you. That's all it has to be. Observing thoughts that are going on in your head during that. But that would be my advice. I think the best advice for somebody is to try some alternative forms of meditation. Now, I did a whole full-length video on meditation like a year ago. I am going to redo that video and bring in even more information this time. I'm going to perfect it even better. And that's going to be actually coming up in a couple weeks. So if you're somebody who's got some questions about meditation, I'm going to answer all of them in a couple weeks that are in an Ask Aislin, okay? So I hope that helped. Anybody who's got any more questions, put them in the chat. I'm still here answering, but I did want to talk about this question Pamela sent this week. So she said, I've always had crystals around my home. I switch them up on my altar each new moon. I'm not sure I'm utilizing them to my full benefit. Is there something more I could be doing with them? So I think my first question for you is what makes you feel that you're not doing enough? So it's always something to think about because what you're doing sounds good to me. And so I wonder where that part comes from that you're not doing enough. And so we had like another member who had asked me, I even asked this question. He just responded to something I said. And I had said, if you're trying to set up a spiritual practice, don't worry about how long it is. Do it for 5 minutes a day, but try to do it every single day, or at least as many days as you can, more days than not. And you will be so much further ahead than if you just tried to inconsistently do long practices, right? So do something little every day. And a member wrote to me and said that was such a relief to hear that because I was so worried I wasn't doing enough or I was doing it wrong or not the right things. And you saying that helped me. So what I want to say is what you're doing, Pamela, is totally fine. If that's all that you're worried about is not like you're just, kind of, it's this external pressure making you feel like you're not doing enough, I'm here to say you can release that right now. But if you feel that you're getting bored, maybe you're getting bored with the practice, there's different things you could do if you want to spice it up or you want to try something different. So what you could do is you could charge the stones in water. You could make different there's so much you could do. So like you could put your new moon water out or your full moon water out. You could put the stones in there, and now the stones are also charged with those energies. You could get stones for each of the 7 chakras, and you could put those in water, and you could make chakra crystal elixirs for each of the chakras. That is something you can do, and you can use those in spell work. You can drink them internally. You could meditate with the stones on your chakras, right? Puts one on your third eye or your heart or your solar plexus or wherever when you're meditating. You could sleep with the stones under your pillow. So these are just like several different options, but there's always something you can do if you're getting bored with your own routine. But if that's not it, just know that what you're doing is enough. Okay, but if you want something else, you could try some of those other options. All right, I hope that helped. And anybody else have any other questions? If not, we could put them in the chat if you're still here with me. I'm just going to mention what's coming up soon. So next week, I guess that would be the 3rd of January, I'm going to be doing an episode on the inner child. So we've done this in our Shadow Seekers membership before. We've spent a whole module on it. We're going to actually, our Shadow Seekers will be doing more of that later this spring, but we're going to do a nice episode here in Body, Mind, Witchcraft on the inner child. So look forward to that next week. And then we're going to be doing the episode on meditation. That is about all the news I've got. But Sabrina said she had been sleeping with a Shiva Lingam stone under her pillow recently. And that's funny that you mentioned that because I just got one. I just got a Shiva Lingam in Sedona not too long ago. And I haven't used it at all yet. But that's cool that you're sleeping with it under the pillow. All right, well, I am going to sign off. It's been a long episode. If I missed any questions from anybody, put them in the chat. I go back. There's a lot going on in the chat, and sometimes I miss stuff. And I get tagged like at least 100 times a day. So if I've ever missed something of yours, definitely tag me again or message me. I'm not doing it on purpose. Sometimes it slips through. I do see one more question here from Kurt, and he said he believes energy vampires are real. How would you protect yourself against them? Someone I know is communicating through a Ouija board, and the entity warned them to put their guard up. Okay, so a couple thoughts. There's a lot in that question. I believe that energy vampires are real as well. I think they're less likely the problem that people have than people think. A lot of people think when bad things happen that it's an energy vampire is doing something to them. I don't think that's always the case. But if you do feel that there's somebody who's kind of sucking your energy, all those ideas that I gave you about your aura, your intention is as strong as any energy vampire's intention to take your energy. Your intention to keep your energy is just as strong as that. So what those people are doing, is basically using mental energy, right, to take energy from others. So you can use mental energy to block that as well. So that idea of kind of pushing out the aura, right? Scanning the aura nightly for like rips or tears, that would be a sign that maybe someone has compromised it, or like dark patches of it, moving those out of the way. But you're basically going to combat them with the same kind of energy that they're using against you. I would say that like with a Ouija board, if there's an entity warning people to keep their guards up, I'd be cautious about what the entity is. Entities that come through spirit boards, unless you know exactly who they are, it's hard to say where they're coming from. And sometimes they'll say things that aren't true or that they have some investment in. And I speak from experience because I've done a lot of this, and it's not always easy to communicate with entities that have our best interests at heart or are more connected to our higher self. But if you do feel that there is somebody, that you do need to have your guard up, protection, that's the best thing you can do. Like I'm going to put the video below this that has all the protection spells and practices. And so for anybody who feels that they're in that situation where someone's kind of sucking their energy out, I would try some of those. I have met people who actually readily admitted to being energy vampires and doing this to other people. But we can combat them with our own kind of push the energy back, push our aura out, and we're not gonna allow those people to compromise our aura. I hope that helps, and then hopefully something in that protection video will also help as well. All right, anything else? If I missed anything, I'll go back and I'll grab it later, but I'm going to let you go. It's been a long one. Last episode of 2023. So I hope everybody has a has a great transition into 2024, and we'll be back with a new episode next Wednesday. All right, until next time, blessed be.